So, hello and welcome to everybody watching in the present or in the future on Zoom, YouTube, Facebook, or anywhere else. Welcome to the series, What Makes Our Inner Work Work? And we're together here for part 26 of this show, which I've called Take Off Your Clothes, Take Off Your Skin. Now, the name I've given this show or meeting, if you like, may sound provocative, which is fine by me. I think we all, in humanity in general, and each and every one of us in particular, really need to be provoked in so many ways, provoked out of the usual ways, out of our usual ways of thinking, of seeing reality, of seeing ourselves, of being. So take off your clothes, take off your skin. Now today, as I often do in this series, I'll read you a few bits and pieces that I suddenly remembered. They came up to me when I was thinking about what I might talk to you about today. These short pieces must have been written, I think, in the late 1990s, perhaps 97, 99, something like that. And what they're talking about has been, to some degree, an ongoing thread, I would say, that I've been working on throughout my life. And one that I believe we're all working on to some extent, whether we're aware of it or not. Now, this series for me is in many ways also about being more exposed to the world, to a certain degree at least, than I was used to. What I'm doing here today and in much of this series is really very, very related to a certain, to the image of taking off one's clothes or one's skin. And of course, in our inner work, we often use various images, which, as you may recall from our last meeting, are only a map. They're not really the territory. They're not the actual thing, but they help us talk about certain things. The images help us make sense of things, make it easier to understand, to remember, to do our inner work. So what we're talking about isn't a truth, it's an image, which I hope will be helpful and will add to our comprehension of one more aspect of the inner work. So usually when we talk about discovering our many, many parts and faces, selves, voices, however we call them, the main images I tend to use have to do with a gathering of lost selves, with, how would I say it, even a coming home, finding the selves, the inner selves, or all our parts, find their way home and get together, are united, integrated, things like that. So that's kind of the usual images that come to me around the work that I do, is kind of all the lost parts finding their way home and having a place to be. And as that happens, we become more whole, more complete, freer, and so on and so forth. But today we will look at all this in a different light, because in a way, I would say that each inner self or part is also something that we take off. like a shirt or a dress or an armor or socks, if you'd like. So I'm going to read you something short that was written in the late 90s, and then we'll, I guess, discuss it. As usual, you're really, really welcome to write in the chat, either in English or in Hebrew. And I'd be actually very happy if you do that. And then I know what you're feeling and thinking about what I say, and we can have a bit more of a discussion in a way. Okay, so here it is. Take off your clothes one by one. Show everything. If still untouched, take off your skin. I'll read it again. Take off your clothes one by one. Show everything. If still untouched, take off your skin. So here in the late 90s, I don't think it began only then, but it seems that it was on my mind, this idea that a very important part of our process has to do with stripping off, in a way, everything that we are, just like we would, take our clothes off. And then it becomes even more, I can't find the word right now, but perhaps extreme, because it says, take off your skin. If still untouched, take off your skin. And it is very interesting to see that, in a way, we hide ourselves in so many ways behind all these parts and selves, which we are identified with, of course, to a certain degree, even if we don't know they even exist. And they seem to, in so many ways, mask who we really are. And what I was writing about here was that all these masks and layers upon layers of clothing, of parts, of inner selves, and of all sorts of other things, by the way, like belief structures and the things that we're used to do and the way we are used to doing them, and so on and so forth. All these things make it, in a way, impossible for us to be touched. It's as if it's an armor or a shield that prevents things to actually reach us. And of course, vice versa, to us, it prevents us from reaching things, okay, whatever they may be. If you have anything that you want to say about this, as I said before, you're very, very welcome to write in the chat. I'll read another little thing written at the same time, more or less, which takes this idea to some other areas, I guess. Here it is. Cities taken off the shivering body. Civilizations crumpled in the dust. Look up with fear and with disgust to see the beauty they so labored to conceal. I'll read it again. Cities taken off the shivering body. Civilizations crumpled in the dust. Look up with fear and with disgust to see the beauty they so labored to conceal. So, what's going on in this little, it's not even a poem, I don't know what it is, what's going on here and why do I think it's relevant? As I hope you could hear, even without seeing the text in front of you, we have a person or a body here, and cities and civilizations are here. The images that cities and civilizations are like clothes that are taken off the shivering body and fall to the ground. Civilizations crumpled in the dust. And when they're down there in the dust on the ground, these clothes that are civilizations and cities, they look up at the body they fell from or they were taken off of with fear and with disgust, okay? And then they see the beauty they so labored to conceal. So what we see here, I think, are many things, and I won't be able to touch on them all, but we see another form, perhaps, of armoring and clothing and disguising that we have on us, and that is more a kind of social and civilized sort of layers of disguise, of protection, of masks, of clothing. And we seem to cling to these things, just like we cling to many of our inner selves, in order for us not to be exposed. Now, not to be exposed because it may be very vulnerable, that's one thing, very, very common, and you know, we all have that common reason to keep ourselves hidden and clothed all the time. I lost my line of thinking for a second. So one of the things, I got it back, one of the things is trying to hide and mask and not experience our vulnerability or our delicacy or our how would I say, our wounds, our inner wounds. And another thing is, and it all ties together, of course, is that in many, many ways, people feel unworthy, disgusting, not beautiful as they are. And then a lot happens to cover us up so that our disgusting self won't be observed. But what we see in these few lines is the exact opposite. I'm just going to quickly read it again. Cities taken off the shivering body, like clothes taken off. Civilizations crumpled in the dust, again, like clothes that are taken off and thrown to the floor. Look up with fear and with disgust. But what do they see? To see the beauty they so labored to conceal. So ask yourselves, if you'd like, what are we hiding with all this clothing put, you know, one on top of the other? Why do we feel the need to hide our deepest selves, even from ourselves? And, you know, and why do we take on the clothing of civilization in such a way that it hides us? You know, there's a lot to say for civilization and for cities and for all sorts of things, at least from my perspective. But why hide so much? So, as we saw here, what we think of as embarrassing and disgusting or humiliating, all those things that seem to cause us to feel shame and dis-ease, all these things, when they are revealed, can be seen and can be experienced as very, very beautiful. But we do need to dare to take off all the coverings, and that isn't easy at all. And in one way, getting to know our inner selves is, as I said before, is something like that. It's both a coming together and a taking off of covers and disguises, because with each self we get to know and to accept, we are less identified with it. And in a way, it's as if it falls off. It falls off us like the clothing, like a shirt, in a good way. And then we find ourselves less covered in layers and layers of distortions and of illusions and of costumes. And as we said before, of disguises, masks, and armor. And of course, there's a lot of sensitivity around taking it all off. Don't I know it? You know, for me, a few years ago, to talk like this live and in English even, it was very, very difficult. And needless to say, I rarely shared such, you know, relatively personal things as I share in this series. Of course, there are many things that I do not share. Most of my life isn't shared. And yet I really, really understood that there may be a great value of really sharing, including reading from very personal diaries, my inner process, in the hope that it would be helpful for others as well. So, as we said, of course, there's a lot of sensitivity, very naturally, around taking it all off. And, you know, when we do that, and especially in the beginning, we can feel very exposed and fragile and tender. And we might feel pain, we might feel vulnerable, we might feel naked, but we can see ourselves and we can be touched and we can be seen by others and we can shine. And we become more and more ourselves, really. We can become more and more natural. Here's the last excerpt I'll read. Again, it's from the late 90s. Written at the same time. This is longer and a bit more complex, I think, but still I think it might be a good idea to share it with you. Okay. Somebody is writing in the chat. Let's see. Can you give an example? What do you mean by taking off things and what happens? Okay, sure. So before we continue, I'll talk a little bit about that. Let's say, and thank you for the question. Let's say, for example, that I am, you know, since I've been a child, perhaps, I've developed a certain inner self that is trying to make sure that I will never feel ashamed. Okay, this is just one example of many. So if I have a kind of self like that, and we all have variations on these themes, then what happens is that usually I become very much identified with it. Okay, and it, of course, again, it's different for different people, but it's, if you don't have this, you have some other types of selves that become, in a way, your managers. Okay, so let's say that this self is protecting me from feeling shame, and perhaps this self, what it does is it takes very good precautions against me showing anything that might cause me to feel shame. Okay, so perhaps it would not allow me to show my vulnerability, or to show that sometimes I get mixed up, or that sometimes I'm confused, or that sometimes I forget what I wanted to say, just what happened to me a moment ago, or that, you know, anything like that. Or it won't agree that I show my ambition, perhaps, because it may be shameful in some, you know, in some cultures, or perhaps I won't be able to show my wildness, or my sexuality, or my whatever, or my intellect, because women aren't supposed to be intellectual, or whatever, in a certain culture or a certain family, and would be shamed if that would be shown. So this self becomes like a kind of cover that is really like, it depends, you know, how thick it becomes, but it can be really like an armor, or it can be more like clothing. Now, the more we find types of selves like this, and actually any type of inner part, inner self, or any other kind of self whatsoever, the moment we realize that it's there and we accept it as it is, but we disidentify with it, then it really is, in a way, also like dropping off another layer of clothing. And when you do it enough, then it might start to feel as if you're dropping off a layer of skin, you know, perhaps like a snake takes off its skin and grows a new one, or something like that. And this is a vulnerable thing to experience, but it's extremely freeing. And then you really feel more and more like yourself, because you're not hidden, and you're not, how do you say, imprisoned by your own selves. So I hope that made that a little bit clearer, and thanks again. So I'll read you the last excerpt now for today. I'll read it slowly because it's a little bit complex, I think. It is said, okay? It is said that ever since good separated from evil, day from night, earth from moon, and man and woman fell asleep beside the mirror pond, there fall pebble moments from the sky into the pond that send ripples through the dazed consciousness of the slumbering race, who then sometimes wakes up, screwing its eyes against the light, or jumps in terror, thinking, silly me, a bad dream. What did I eat last night? Alas, these ripples quickly fade, leaving behind the fragile mirror lying undisturbed, beyond which dark depths and wonders unimagined lurk. Just as a vain woman examines her tailored skin above the sink, that looks, she thinks, for her age, pretty good, especially in soft lighting, then smugly yawns and falls asleep. I know this is kind of complex, but let's talk about it. So this excerpt talks about our entire race, and not only about us as individuals. And our entire race here, in a way, is portrayed as a vain woman, a woman who is very much into, you know, looking good, especially. And this vain woman, our race, looks in the mirror, but chooses not to really see but see only the surface, you know, the vanity of her looks. And it immediately falls asleep again because it doesn't want to see what's really going on. And in this way, this woman, which is perhaps the human race also, keeps itself perhaps seemingly safe, but forever separate from all that is. And this vain woman, which in this case, you know, it's just an image, no more, is really the human race perhaps, loses the chance to see beyond the surface of the mirror, beyond the outer layers, okay, of the skin or of her clothing. And she loses the chance to see what's beyond the surface of the mirror. And what's beyond is sometimes dark, but there are also depths and amazing wonders and beauty there. And then this woman, from this little excerpt from the 90s, smugly yawns and falls asleep again. So it's difficult to wake up. It's very difficult for us to wake up individually, and it's very difficult for us to wake up as a race. So I see it, of course. And this all, of course, brings us back always to our own separate and personal inner work, because there's only so much we can do together as a race, especially when most of the race isn't doing any work whatsoever, alas, right now. So in our own personal work, when we do it, do we remain on the surface, fearing the possibility of seeing what's actually in there, inside of us, which is also what's out in the world, which we are also not very happy to see with very clear and open eyes? Do we cling to our clothes and to society's clothes? Or can we allow ourselves to very gently take layer after layer off and see who we really are, which really is a very beautiful thing beneath it all? And do we wish to forever live in illusions? Do we? Or are we brave enough to gently pull them down and see our lives, ourselves, and our world as they really are? So, you know, of course, there's always more than one way to do the work. And there are, of course, quite a few ways that actually work. But I mainly talk about the ways that I use. And one of the ways that I know to get closer and closer to who I really am, to get closer and closer to what is really happening and the ability to actually see what's going on. Of course, I may be wrong about what I see, but daring to look and to not hide from the truth. The way that really works for me is through working with inner selves, but not only the inner selves of voice dialogue, but also collective selves, and all sorts of other things that we won't go into right now, but which I teach about and will teach about even more in the very near future. And each part that I discover, whether it feels more like a very inner personal part, or whether it's meeting something that feels in the beginning much larger than I am in a way. Whatever it is, as I said before, it first of all makes me more whole and complete and creates a stronger oneness and connection and even connectivity, I would call it. But on the other hand, each thing is like another layer falls off of me. And I know myself better because of that. And I'm closer to who I am because of that. So the best way that I know to do it, which is also very, very safe, and perhaps, although it might seem a little like something that demands more work, I think, especially in the beginning, it is the quickest and safest and express train in a way, is to work with our inner selves, not one at a time, but at least two at a time. To, for example, meet a self that is, for example, feeling lonely. And after really understanding who it is and, getting to know it and accept it, and as much as possible at that point, find out someone, some inner self or inner part that in some way is the opposite to it. For example, someone really friendly that feels at home wherever it goes, or something like that. Or I'll give another example. For example, let's say that I realized that one of my armors is an inner part that tries to protect me from making mistakes, okay? And it keeps monitoring me all the time so that I won't make a mistake. And because I'm identified with this part that keeps looking at me, I can feel very unnatural. I can feel very, cautious or very careful about what I do, what I say, how I look, am I making the right impression, and so on and so forth. So I might talk with a part like this, and then I will talk to something that is in some way the other polarity, okay? And it can be all sorts of things. But for example, in this case, it could be a part that's really, really spontaneous and has no monitoring at all, or a part that is that doesn't care what anybody thinks of me. Okay. And then, and this is very, very important, after talking with these two opposing or polarized parts within me, I will be, in a way, in the middle, in what I call the aware I. And I will kind of look at what happened here and look at these two selves and see, A, that I have this within me, but I also have this within me. And B, that I'm not exactly this, and I'm not exactly that. I'm both, but I'm also neither of them. Okay? Of course, I can't, teach this in a few moments, but I hope it gives a kind of feeling for the type of work that I recommend, especially in the beginning. Of course, as much as you become more and more free in doing this type of work, you can do other things as well, and it would still work very well. Okay, so thank you so much for joining me again. I hope this has been useful, and I wish you very happy travels. And I wish us all, including myself, to continue really doing our work and not only thinking about doing our work. and not only doing work that is easy for us to do, but really, carving the time and space in our lives and becoming more and more brave to meet ourselves step by step in a way that works and in a way that is also responsible, because it's not only about working, it's also about us coming out of it, becoming more and more empowered, becoming more and more free, becoming less and less blind, becoming more and more ourselves. So many, many thanks, and see you again in a week, I guess, perhaps two. We'll see. Bye-bye, and thanks.